I'll say good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the continuation of the Young Scholars of Turkey program. Today we welcome Professor Brian Mello from Muhlenberg College. Wonderful place up in Pennsylvania. Professor Mello's topic today is about Islamic mobilization in Turkey. Professor Mello went to Fairfield University and then worked on his PhD at that very esteemed institution that produces many fine scholars with University of Washington, with Reshad Kasaba and company, and has braved a second trip. This is the rescheduled talk that was originally going to take place with the last great Arctic blast. So thank you for coming down a second time. Or he made it partway last time. It was intrepid of him to do that, so we welcome you here.
I brought spring with me today.
Inshallah. Welcome.
Thanks. So, good afternoon. The camera will not do justice to the interesting space that I'm speaking in. I want to thank the SIDA Foundation, the Young Scholars on Turkey program for inviting me here. Also, the Institute of Turkish Studies for hosting me, and really for funding part of the research. I had a small grant from ITS last summer that allowed me to go to Turkey and do some of the research that actually informs the talk today. I want to give a caveat about what I'm going to say. It's part of a larger project that is actually comparative in nature. It's with a colleague of mine, Mohsen Hashim at Muhlenberg, who though he studies post-Soviet stuff in his actual research, he's from Bangladesh. And so we've had this ongoing interest in the fact that both Bangladesh and Turkey have experienced several military interventions in their history. And part of those interventions, or some of those interventions, have specifically either opened up space for Islamic politics in those countries, or particularly Islamic political parties, and sometimes closed political opportunities or space for them. So I'm giving sort of half of a research project, or a presentation of half of a research project today. So we'll see how it goes. Given the importance of both Islamic politics in Turkey and the nature of civil-military relations in Turkey, there's surprisingly little theoretical work that specifically explores this relationship between Islam, civil-military relations, and the question of democracy. I think there's a lot of research on these topics, but efforts to try to come up with sort of social science theoretical frameworks that can capture the dynamics of these three, there's a shortcoming there, I think. So the project that I'm going to talk about today is designed to try to bridge this divide. It's a massive task, I think, which will probably tend towards over-abstraction today and probably leave some in this room unsatisfied. But I'll give it a go. Since my focus is on Islamic politics in Turkey, I'm going to concentrate mostly on the military interventions of 1980, the so-called postmodern coup of 1997, and much more contemporary civil-military relations, particularly as they affect the Justice and Development Party, which for today's purposes I'm going to refer to in the English acronym of JDP. I don't know why, but it's just the way I wrote up in the talk, instead of using Party or AKP or whatever. In the talk today, I'm going to seek to apply insights from the literature on social movements, which is what we're really drawing from, in order to examine the forces shaping Islamic political parties in Turkey. In particular, I'm going to draw from the literature on social movements a focus on how the process of politics involved with social movements is dynamic, and how it's shaped in particular by the transformation of political opportunity structures. So from the perspective of Islamic political parties, the question is, do changes in political opportunity structures provide the means for the inclusion of Islamic actors, or do they present threats that close the political system? And I'm going to talk about these kinds of things. I need to spend a little bit of time, though, defining what we mean in the literature of social movements by political opportunity structures. Really briefly, Sidney Tarrow defines this concept as, and I'm not sure this is the most helpful of definitions, but he defines it as consistent, but not necessarily formal, permanent, or national, signals to social or political actors which either encourage or discourage them to use their internal resources to form a social movement. Beyond the problematic definition of what we mean by political opportunity structures, the comparative politics literature on social movements has at least narrowed down what we mean by political opportunity structures to four basic elements: the stability of elite alignments, the availability of elite allies, the openness or closure of a political system, and the willingness or capacity of a state to repress. Today I'm going to concentrate on the importance of the latter three: availability of elite allies, openness or closure of the political system, and the willingness and capacity of the state to repress. I actually think in the Turkish case, the question of elite alignments, stability of elite alignments, is less important when we're trying to explain the trajectory of Islamic political parties post-1980. The openness or closure of a political system, I think, is best understood as a means to capture the rules of the game within any political system. In the Turkish concept, or the Turkish context, I should say, the rules of the game have been set by a couple of things. First, I think by the nature of the proportional representation system in parliament, with its rather high and unusual 10% threshold for gaining seats in parliament. And second, by the oversight of the judiciary and the Turkish military historically, a set of rules to regulate ships, in this case particularly through the in Turkey, intervened in Turkey. So the nature of elite allies in the Islamic political mobilization. In 1997, obviously the military disappears as the allies come from external sources. Again here, ascension process become important for shaping Islamic political mobilization. When it comes to Islamic politics in Turkey, questions about the willingness or the capacity of the Turkish state to repress really draws from two different groups: the military and the judiciary. The Turkish judiciary is widely noted for being one of those judiciaries that has closed a rather large number of political parties in its history, disproportionate in the nature of democracies. But the Turkish military is what I'm going to concentrate on, not so much the role of judicial repression, but the role of the military and its willingness or capacity to repress Islamic activism. From the perspective of Islamic political actors, the question then is, how do changes in political opportunity structures provide the means for either the inclusion of Islamic actors within the political system, or how do they create threats that might lead to their exclusion? While Islamic politics in Turkey, as I think most in this room probably know, involves a large number of individuals and organizations, I'm focusing primarily on political parties. I know, in fact, that there are some people who study Islamic politics, Hakan Yavuz would be one of them, who would bristle at me even calling the Justice and Development Party an Islamic party. In his most recent book, he says, in fact, how can a party that has no specific Islamic agenda, be called an Islamic political party? But I'm going to do it nonetheless. So let me sort of take this through a little bit more detail here. The 1980 military intervention, as I mentioned, provided Islamic activists with certain elite allies within the Turkish political system. We might call that an opening of political opportunities. But nonetheless, Islamic political movement in Turkey grew. This marked, I think, the formation of Islamic politics in Turkey. The critical ability of elite allies responded to the structure of the electoral system, rules governing proportional representation. Here, I want to say that proportional systems don't always lead political parties towards moderation, particularly religious-based or parties that emerge from religious movements. Israel's the interesting counterpoint here. Israel has a proportional representation system with a really low 2% threshold. So the result is more ideological pure parties are rewarded by getting seats in government. The rather high 10% threshold in Turkey has, I think, shaped the behavior of Islamic political parties in the post-1980 era. They need to become sort of catch-all parties. They need to cross-class in their coalition formation. They need to appeal both to working classes, to maybe rural voters, to a set of business elites. And I think the nature of the platforms and agendas and the nature of the electoral support for all the major Islamic political parties post-1980, the Welfare Party, its successor, the Virtue Party, the contemporary Justice and Development Party, has drawn from a cross-class coalition of support. And I think that the agenda of these parties is shaped by the need to overcome this 10% hurdle in order to get seats in parliament. I think that has a moderating effect, by the way, on their agenda. A more ideologically pure agenda, I don't think, would be appealing to a cross-class coalition of voters. So the rules of the game, I think, are important here. Since the formation of the Welfare Party in the 1980s, Islamic parties have engaged in this strategy of campaigning based upon the goal of developing cross-class support. So if we take a look at the electoral constituency that supports the Justice and Development Party, it comes partly from working classes who find appealing calls for an agenda that promotes some form of globalization with justice. It gains supports from a group of the so-called Anatolian Tigers, right? A group of business folks who like the economically liberal agenda of the party. It gains support from other intellectuals who might be in favor of their democratic rhetoric or their human rights rhetoric, right? So it's appealing to a broad set of audiences in Turkey. This was true of the, I think, Justice and Development Party's predecessor, the Welfare Party. I think it partly explains why the Welfare Party came to power or became one of the leading parties in the middle of the 1990s. The problem, of course, for the Welfare Party was that when they were in power, some of their policies began to, I think, move away from what the secular elite decided was acceptable forms of behavior. So you had some people talking about skepticism of Turkey's relationship with Europe. You had some foreign policy meetings with Libya. You had skepticism about Turkish relationship with Israel. And ultimately then in 1997, this all came to a head when the Turkish military intervened and suggested that the greatest threat now in Turkish politics was coming from this nefarious rise of political Islam in the Turkish political system. The history is well known. By June of 1997, continuous pressure from the military that lasted from really February through 1997, or June of 1997, caused Prime Minister Erbakan to resign from his position, and a few months later, in January of 1998, the Constitutional Court closed the Welfare Party for having violated the secular provisions of the Constitution. Leaders of the party formed a new political party, Virtue. This too was closed, of course, by the Constitutional Court. Whereas the military intervention of 1980 then created favorable opportunities for Islamic political parties in Turkey, this 28 February process, the 1997 intervention, represented an ongoing threat to Islamic political parties in Turkey. Yet, despite the military's efforts to curb political opportunities that were available for Islamic political parties, Islamic political mobilization continued in Turkey. There are two main reasons, I think, for the ability of Islamic parties to survive this period of repression. The first has to do with political learning that resulted from these changes and transformations in political opportunity structures. And the second has to do with the emergence of new important elite allies, particularly in the European Union, and as well as the role of the European Union in transforming the rules of the game in Turkey through the Copenhagen criteria and the accession process. So in the wake of the 1997 military intervention, a fissure emerged within Islamic politics in Turkey, and two parties emerged to compete to succeed Welfare and Virtue. The older leaders of Welfare and Virtue, of course, formed the leadership of the Felicity Party, which proved remarkably poor at gaining popular support, and the younger leaders, the younger generation of politicians, formed the Justice and Development Party. For them, the lesson of the military intervention in 1997 was that there was a need to subordinate an explicit Islamic agenda in favor of a less religiously defined social, political, and economic agenda. This younger generation of Islamists has sought to de-emphasize any kind of clear Islamic agenda, especially one that would be destined to raise the ire of the secular military establishment. This isn't true, of course, in their entirety. There have been moments when they've taken up religious issues with Imam Hatip high schools, with the question of the headscarf. So there are times when, and I'm going to address this in a minute, there are times when they have had an explicitly religious agenda, but by and large, most of their platforms, and in fact their self-identification is not as an Islamic party, but as a conservative democratic party is the name they've given to themselves, or the identification. So by all accounts then, the leadership of the JDP has learned from the experience of the Welfare Party and gone through great lengths to avoid taking controversial positions on most religious issues. As you know, in general elections in 2002 and 2007, and local elections in 2004, the JDP has emerged as the clear and strongest political party in the Turkish political system. So such political learning by leaders of Islamic political parties in Turkey took place at an auspicious moment in Turkey's relationships with the European Union. While the Welfare Party was skeptical of Turkey's ambition to join the European Union, the leadership of the JDP has strongly supported Turkey's EU ambitions. In 2002, just as the JDP was rising to power, the Copenhagen summit provided Turkey with December of 2004 as the date for reviewing Turkey's progress towards final membership talks. If Turkey made progress in fulfilling the Copenhagen criteria, then membership talks would begin. Right? I was in Turkey in 2004 as doing research as the JDP was ushering in these these massive fundamental changes in the political system, right? And of course, in December, they got a favorable nod from the EU. Nonetheless, and by the way, in 2004, everything seemed like, oh, it's inevitable Turkey will become part of the European Union, right? I think today, no one would suggest that this inevitability exists, right? In fact, by 2006, it was gone. Really, by the election of Nicolas Sarkozy, the real hope of Turkey gaining entrance into the European Union had seemed to vanish. And public opinion polling right now, the number of Turks who feel that Turkey will eventually be actually allowed to join the European Union is sort of historically low. And so from a high point in 2004, when it seemed as if the EU process was on an inevitable path towards inclusion, the EU no longer seems to be this inevitability for Turkey, which then raises a question about how much then can the EU constrain political opportunities or open opportunities for Islamic political parties, right? Nevertheless, if we look at the last 3 years, despite the fact that there has been fear among the secular elite in Turkey that the JDP's rhetoric about democracy and human rights, its transformations to align Turkey with the EU process, there's fear among some that this is all a ruse, a distraction, that ultimately the JDP and its constituents have this goal to Islamicize Turkish state and society, right? And this has created a sense of political tension in Turkey these days. This conflict between the elected leadership of the JDP and the secular elite has played itself out in three, probably countless, but I think for me I focus on three important events: the election of Abdullah Gül as president, the effort to end the restrictions on the wearing of the headscarf in public places, including schools, and the recent closure case that was brought against the Justice and Development Party. To this, we can add some new ones, right? The referendum process that just went through. We can talk about the ongoing Ergenekon investigation. I mean, these are all sort of symptoms of moments when we can see tension existing between the ruling Justice and Development Party and the and what we might call the secular state apparatus. As these recent events indicate, since the beginning of the February 28th process in 1997, tensions between political elites associated with Islamic political parties and secular elites remain high. The Turkish military has played a central role in these tensions. In short, the military continues to seek to veto the power of civilian Islamic elites, especially when it feels their agenda goes too far. Changes in political opportunity structures, though, go a long way in explaining the ability of the JDP to avoid the fate of its predecessors and to push back against the military establishment. Foremost, the JDP came to power at that auspicious moment in Turkish-EU relations, and so was able to use the cover of Turkish entrance into the EU to push back against the military's role. The military restrained itself from really closing or really moving harshly against the JDP during those key years to 2006. And I think that had a lot to do with the fact that the EU accession process was on that was moving forward, and part of the EU process was really having real civilian control of the military, so recalibrating civil-military relations in Turkish politics. All those changes that the JDP was able to usher in, they mattered really for changing the rules of the game internally. What the JDP was able to do in a certain sense is create a set of enduring political opportunities in its favor. No longer would they need to rely on elite allies, external allies like the folks in the European Union, because now they've developed a sense of popularity in the country. They've won several elections, that now they have a base of support on their own, sort of stand on their own as they push back against some of the parts of the state system that would seek to constrain them. So I'm going to, in the interest of time and getting to questions, I have a brief discussion that I've prepared, but I'm going to go away from it, that suggests that some people who sort of characterize the Turkish military, Gareth Jenkins and others, for example, who study relations in Turkey, that they often, I think, read it too much from the line of the Turkish military. They take their line to heart, and that when we look at Islamic political parties, we can understand that the reason, or one of the biggest impediments, I think, from there actually being a groundswell of politics from below in Turkey, is the role historically of the Turkish military in constraining and shaping political opportunity structures which social movements in Turkey face. Right. I want to end though by sort of thinking about these political opportunity structures and what they imply, maybe some policy implications that this analysis points to. First, I think political opportunity structures in Turkey have rewarded moderation, at least when it comes to Islamic political parties. Here in Turkey, the Kurdish example is the most instructive counterpoint. While pro-Kurdish politics has at times, or political forces have at times, found allies within the Turkish political system, there never has really been the same level of for pro-Kurdish political parties. In the political struggle has generally failed to provide that the rules of the Turkish political system parties, that they are too far against the secular nature of the state, and this is, I think, forestalled any kind of emergence. Second, it seems fairly clear that the leadership of the Justice and Development Party is motivated by to pursue a powerful set of opportunity structures in the long term. Need to rely on external allies. They would like to recalibrate the opportunity structures in Turkey, a more favorable set of opportunities for the party itself. And this can secure the party in the long term against any kind of judicial repression, against any kind of... This is, I think, how we can understand what was going on with the 2007 presidential crisis or presidential election. I think this is how we can understand the recent constitutional reform package, that the JDP is motivated by the goal of staying in power. And one way to do that is to assure permanent favorable opportunity structures without having to rely on external allies to open them up for you. The third implication from this, and linked to the second point, is that I think the Justice and Development Party is motivated more by its political and electoral preferences, more by its pragmatic responses to changing opportunity structures, not to mention its effort to shape favorable political opportunity structures for itself, than by any kind of ideological purity. Furthermore, given the party's pragmatism, it seems unlikely that the JDP would abandon those issues and means that have worked to create such a successful and broad electoral coalition in favor of, say, a frankly more ideological and much less popular, more pure Islamist agenda, right? I don't think that's a likely move, because I think it's an electorally losing move. I think the JDP is more of a pragmatic party than that. Finally, the JDP is likely to secular policies. I think structural opportunities has been favorable to the JDP. Tensions between the party and secular elites suggest that there are on how far the party can go to pursue policies that challenge the secular state. And again, it may not even want to pursue a policy agenda that seeks to dismantle state secularism in Turkey. Where it has sought to challenge secular policy most explicitly, the result has been to exacerbate disharmony and to raise tensions. Justification for pursuing some of the policy. Particularly here, I think the effort to appeal restrictions on headscarves is illustrative of this. It's overwhelmingly supported by Turkish public opinion. This is a winning policy strategy. And so they're backed up by being able to go to the court and have that, though, such as recent forays into the regulation of alcohol, may be more popularly perceived as imposing values. So given political opportunity structures in Turkey, I think that the party is most likely to continue pursuing only those policies and agendas that challenge secularism in Turkey. And that's where I'll kind of end. But I think, on the alcohol thing, Prime Minister Erdogan's comment on this, it happened to give my talk, so it was a great example I was going to include, but now it's a little bit dated, right? Lower level representatives of the JDP toyed with harsher regulations around alcohol in certain neighborhoods. Erdogan had to walk that back. And so, speaking before, to never intervene in anyone's lifestyle, and we never allow anyone to do that. Justice and Development Party seek to advocate any kind of agenda that would be perceived as going too far. I think the leadership is so pragmatic, and they are really careful to walk it back. They'll challenge state secularism where it's popular, but I don't think they're. I think they learned from the past that to do so in too explicit a way risks closing the opportunities that they have available, and they won't. I don't think they will take that challenge on, at least not in the short term, in the long term. So that's where I'll kind of end for questions.
Terrific. Thank you very much, and I'll do what I always get to do. I'm sitting in this chair, I get to ask the first question. And after that, if you're asking a question, if you would just introduce yourself, that would be very useful. I think you cover a lot of ground in a very interesting way. My question would turn on something maybe that you haven't addressed, which is the longevity of the JDP. And it is a big tent. I mean, many times, you look back and it's almost like a Johnsonian Democrat Party, where you have all these different constituencies that are bound together, and they're pretty effective. And I think at the very end here, you touched on something that was quite interesting, which is the alcohol and the rollback and the like. The AKP's been in power for quite some time now. Do you think that there's a chance, given the fact that there is a broad spectrum here, and it's a large party, that we start seeing the centripetal forces of the party beginning to exert themselves, and the underlying constituencies begin to manifest themselves?
Yeah, I think that's possible. I'll suggest, and maybe I'll just conjecture, I don't know if this is certain, two reasons why that may not be such a danger for them right now. And one of them is sort of part of the one of the reasons, I think, the undemocratic characteristic of the most undemocratic aspect of the party itself, which is the personalistic nature of it around the prime minister. The fact that Erdogan, the personage of Erdogan, seems to be so important for this party has limited the ability of lower level folks to participate in shaping the agenda of the party. As long as Erdogan remains that kind of a powerful figure in the party, I think it holds together some of those lower forces. If they get discontent with his leadership, if they get discontent with the lack of democracy at the top, that becomes a greater danger. And we see a little bit of that, but not enough yet to be a real worry, I think, for the party. The other sort of benefit that they have is that all other parties in Turkey right now seem to be politically inept compared to the Justice and Development Party. They're all running campaigns that seem to be modeled on old styles of doing politics. They have large rallies, they'll hang their banners in public squares, they'll do the very traditional campaigning, but no one is organizing the way that First Welfare did, the way the Justice and Development Party does. No one organizes as a social movement, no one penetrates into the local areas as well as they do. And so the ineptitude of the other political parties, I think, also bodes well for the JDP to stay in power for a while. Part of the thing is, I think that one of the reasons they're supported is because they have actually, they've kept the economy moving forward. Turkey, unlike many other countries, hasn't been so adversely affected by the economic downturn, and that helps them too. So, but you're right. I think there are risks in anytime you have a broad electoral coalition, that when the party doesn't really meet the demands of parts of that constituency, will they break off and split away? I think the question is, are there any viable alternatives? And with the 10% threshold, you better have a viable alternative if you're going to get representation in Parliament. And you can't just break away and form a small splinter group and hope to get 5% of the vote and somehow influence national politics, right? So
they're certainly well organized, and I don't know if any of you have seen the video that Brian and I saw this morning, which is of Kılıçdaroğlu taking an up escalator in an effort to try. It's pretty hilarious. It's out there, and it speaks volumes. Questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, Billy Wright from the library, and I sometimes catalog Turkish books. And I was following the Egyptian revolution very carefully, and I remember hearing several times that Turkey could be a model for the reformers in Egypt.
yeah.
And I'm wondering, listening to your account this morning, what precisely in the Turkish experience do you think it would be that the Egyptians should look to?
What precisely in the Turkish experience? Look, Turkey has had at times, certainly has I think Egypt has as well, a vibrant civil society, various sort of social movements that work, various political parties that are important and successful. I wouldn't want Egypt to have to emulate the Turkish example, though, because I think that Turkey it's taken a long time to move towards consolidating democracy in Turkey, and it clearly still struggles with it, right? You can't qualify, I think, as a fully consolidated democracy whenever you have institutions that are sort of part of the state, but that intervene to oust political parties, that intervene, to sort of recalibrate the political system. So I think when people use Turkey or suggest Turkey as a model for Egypt, I'm sort of suspicious of them. Because I think what they're saying is that the Turkish military has done such a great job of containing the Turkish people, right? And that you've needed sort of this sort of strong guardian always in the background because you can't trust the people to do what's right for themselves. And so I'm suspicious that when people talk about a Turkish model for Egypt, that this might be what they're thinking of. I don't know. I kind of worry about that.
I'm Raza Kavakchikan. I'm at university. I was wondering, and it's kind of connected to the previous question, looking at Egypt, going on in Egypt. There's a lot of people who allege that there's a civil dictatorship in Turkey. How would you comment on that?
A civil dictator. I think that, I mean, people who read about this have called it a dual state almost. That in Turkey the military and frankly the constitutional court system has almost functioned as if it were one state in and of itself, and then there's the elected apparatuses as well. Some have described, for example, the role of the Turkish military in Turkish politics as being similar to the role of the Guardian Council in Iran, where there's kind of oversight and almost a sort of veto power or potential of veto power. Gareth Jenkins, who I criticized it to a certain extent in my piece, I think one thing that he's really insightful on in terms of the civil-military relations in Turkey is that the military intervenes not merely in the big dramatic formal interventions, right, 1960, 1971, 1980, 1997, but all throughout since 1960, it's utilized the National Security Council and to signal its opinions on certain pieces of legislation, to weigh in on public policies, and so. I don't know. I think it's too strong to suggest there's that the military is functioning as a dictatorship in Turkish politics. I think there's a contest between these two seeming states, and some people suggest that the JDP may be resolving this and getting and really bringing institutionally the military under civilian control. I don't know.
Yes.
I'm Stuart Steingold, Georgetown parent. That was a good segue to my question, which is that it's tough to look inside the military and try to figure out what the cross currents are. Can you help us evaluate where the military is and what some of the trends in the military might be in terms of its support of the political system, wherever the political system might go?
Oh. You're right. It's a really tough question.
If you can, you'd be better than CNN.
Well, you mean in terms of the Turkish? In terms of, are you speaking?
Yeah, in Turkey.
In Turkey,
is there an ultimate break on, say, the Islamic movement in Turkey that the military will have over time, or is the military also going to evolve over time as society evolves?
Well, I think the military has evolved as a result of changing political opportunity structures, right? And I think that when we talk about the willingness and capacity of a state to repress, I actually think that the capacity of the Turkish military to repress Islamic political parties is diminished in this day and age. And I think there's a couple of things that signal that to me. One is I think it's the way it's been relatively aloof in the Ergenekon scandal. They really haven't, in any kind of forceful way, sought to shut that investigation down, and members of the former military have gone before this ongoing investigation, which may or not be based on factual information or conspiracy theories or and so I think we can utilize that to sort of suggest that the military has been constrained by the current state of political opportunity, by the political power that the Justice and Development Party has, the appeal that it has broadly. The other thing about the Turkish military is there's a real difference, I think, between rank and file, and all Turks serve in the national services, and the top elite, right, who are steeped in Kemalist ideology. And so there's a hierarchy in the Turkish military that may bristle at some of the moves that the Justice and Development Party, that may bristle at political Islam in Turkey. But how effectively can they utilize that as a mechanism of repression, given the popularity of the Justice and Development Party? I think that's a difficult question. It seems that the military has sort of taken a back seat to the Constitutional Court in being the key mechanism for trying to constrain Islamic politics in Turkey. Interesting there, I think the court was actually rebuked, right, when it brought the closure case against the Justice and Development Party. Close decision, but they decided not to close it. Right? They stripped it of some finances, but that's sort of a change. They could have easily closed it if they wanted to, but I think they felt constrained. Yeah.
Yes.
Stanley Coburn, a Georgetown alum. One of the concerns my Turkish friends here express is with the attitude toward freedom of the press,
Yeah.
which you didn't address, and particularly for something like the Dogon group with the tax base.
Yeah.
And this makes them a little bit nervous, and you didn't address that at all.
Right.
So
So there's an epilogue to the talk, which I decided not to go through for time's sake, where I really try to return to this question about democracy, right, and what this means in Turkey. And so I think that the Justice and Development Party is pragmatic in its agenda, and by that I mean its goal is to stay in power, and so it acts in a pragmatic way to stay in power and to create a broad agenda, right? They've acted in a way that has actually liberalized the Turkish political system and democratized it, right? Anytime you can take that power dynamic of civil-military relations and subordinate military figures to civilian elites, that's an essential element of a democracy, right? So they've had a force for democratization, they've had a force and a role in liberalization, but it's not been an unproblematic one. And on the question of the freedom of the press, you're right on. There's also questions about sort of reinstantiating a kind of set of patriarchal relationships. Jenny White has a really important book. It's a little bit dated. It's on the welfare party in the 1990s, where she looks at how the welfare party utilized women in urban neighborhoods as their primary organizing force. So women play a real important role in Justice and Development Party organizing as well, but a really diminished role in leadership circles, right? And so some have criticized the party for on one end promoting democracy as a whole, but in their own private realm of instantiating kind of undemocratic patriarchal relations. So I think you're right to raise that concern about freedom of the press in Turkey. Yeah.
Court voided the fine yesterday of 1.8 billion. So that one's off the table. It voided that decision, that fine. So the checks and balances will be there.
Unless the new constitutional referendum packs the court with allies, but
Well, there's yeah.
You talk about sort of the pragmatic way the JDP acts to stay in power, and I wanted to ask your reading of sort of Turkey's regional foreign policy initiatives and to what extent public opinion plays a role in that.
best move the JDP ever did was to not call for unanimity in their parliamentary bloc on the vote to allow the United States to use Turkey as a northern front in the war in Iraq. Had they done so, they might have lost an important part of their electoral support, and they might not have been able to retain power for the long term. So I think they've been quite astute domestically in their foreign policy agenda. I don't think it's being shaped by external sources. I think they have an interest in promoting Turkey as a player in the Middle East and in Europe. And B, I think it's electorally a winning foreign policy right now. I think that generally speaking, they've taken foreign policy stands that are reasonably popular, and so I think that that's kind of how they're operating. Even including sort of the cooling off of a Turkish-Israeli relationship. I think that's popular domestically. So when Erdogan gets up and walks out on the Israeli prime minister, that's theater, but it's theater that's playing the audience it's meant for. I think is the Turkish electorate. It happens just weeks before the national vote, right? The parliamentary vote. I think it's political theater, but I think it's playing for a domestic audience.
Very effective. Yes.
My name is Melinda Reyes. I'm an undergraduate here at Georgetown. My question is sort of along the same lines as this lady's question. Just sort of regarding foreign policy, do you see that as more likely to splinter the coalition on any particular given issue? Like, are there major contentions about any given foreign policy issue, or do you think that the party is more at risk in the long run, perhaps, to splinter due to domestic issues?
Yeah, I think domestic politics is probably the more likely source of any kind of splintering of the party itself. And where this may come down, I don't know. It's got a strong working class rhetoric to it, and it does have ties with reasonable ties with some of the labor unions in Turkey. But others are particularly opposed and feel let down, I think, by Justice and Development Party's agenda. So where it risks losing its electoral constituency, I think, maybe among working class voters more than other parts of its domestic constituency. But even that being said, I mean, Turkey's economy, like I said, is still weathering the storm reasonably well, and so it's been able to get through there. Foreign policy-wise, it's interesting. The Turkish military may have strong ties with the State of Israel, but they didn't rebuke the prime minister for sort of that cooling of relationships. Turkey's tried to negotiate behind the United States' back. Turkey, in conjunction with Brazil, some kind of an arrangement to forestall Iran's nuclear program. That hasn't been rebuked by the Turkish military either, that kind of effort to engage in that diplomacy. And then they formed weird bedfellows at times, right? So that it's not really a foreign policy issue, but when it comes to violent conflict against the Kurds, or the brief military invasion of northern Iraq to go after PKK camps, that came under Justice and Development Party's watch, right? So at times the military and the Justice and Development Party has been able to sort of work itself together in reasonable ways.
Yes. Yes.
Selçuk Turan, Turkish University PhD family. I will focus on a little bit on domestic politics and with regard to Kurdish question. How does GDP pragmatism play with regard to Kurdish mobilization? Because when you said Kurdish politics failed to take advantage of the political opportunity structure.
Well,
and the second question, sorry. The second one is, what would you think if a Ergenekon case wouldn't have been so would have been not continued so far and would have failed? Do you think that JDP would have been so strong against Syria or would have been so powerful in domestic politics?
The second question first. The Ergenekon question is interesting. I'd love to see public opinion polling data on how that ongoing case impacts the Turkish electorate. I know it's fodder for nightly news, soap opera stuff. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff about it, but I'm not sure how that plays out. In other words, if it went away, would it somehow erode Justice and Development Party's position? I don't know. What it's quite useful for, though, is at a moment when you're popular, to sort of suggest that there's been this nefarious conspiracy of folks who are going to foment an artificially violent situation in order to justify the ouster of your party. That's great. That's great cover for trying to push back against the Turkish military, whether it's true or not. Now I don't know if I don't think it's one giant ruse, because those would be some really smart people to concoct that kind of story. But if it goes away, I think the good has already been accomplished from it. Right? It's already suggested that there may in fact be elements of the Turkish state or part of the Turkish state apparatus that doesn't like them, and so would engage in undemocratic practices against this popular ruling political party, which gives it support, right? Makes it seem the victim of state practices, right? So that good has already been done for them, and it can't be undone, even if the case doesn't go forward at all. It's already out there. On the Kurdish question, my argument or my reading of Kurdish politics in Turkey, particularly, you can go back if you want to the 70s. There have been moments where opportunities have been available, when elite allies have been available. In the 60s and 70s, with the Turkish Workers' Party, with the labor unions organizing in the southeast, right, opening up space for Kurdish politics in the Turkish political system. To a smaller extent in the 1980s, with some degrees of liberalization, right? But generally speaking, I think that political opportunity structures have been much more closed for Kurdish activists in Turkey. And so we've had multiple Kurdish political parties. And like many of the Islamic political parties, they've been closed by the Constitutional Court. And activists have been thrown in jail, just like some activists in Islamic political parties, Tayyip Erdogan among them, right, have been jailed and these kinds of things. What's different between Islamic politics and Kurdish politics in Turkey is that Islamic politics has had at least a certain important space that we're legitimated in, right? So the 1980s, where you get the growth of an Islamic social movement, where you get the welfare party, which is allowed to play in the political system, which formulates a national presence, right? This really allows it to become part of the political system. You haven't quite had this for, I think, pro-Kurdish political groups. And that, I think, has meant when so instead of experiencing opportunities, Kurdish activists in Turkey experience threats. And when threatened, that doesn't necessarily mean any kind of pro-Kurdish politics disappears. It might mean that it just manifests itself in more violent ways, right? That people try to make their voice heard in more violent means. Now, the Justice and Development Party has tried, and it's done this with some success, to take on the Kurdish issue and to draw electoral support in the southeast towards it. It's part of that broad tent coalition that it's trying to build. And it did some real good in terms of Kurdish rights issues, passing the legislation that allowed the broadcasting of Kurdish radio and television programs, right? Supporting the teaching of Kurdish in schools. But at the same time, it has also presided over the reemergence of a kind of hostility between the Turkish military and whatever it is, Congregale or PKK or whatever the name of the organization leading a violent uprising is.
Kadir, I think we have time for one more question.
Okay. I was just going to say, are you, a couple comments, I'm not sure if this is your exactly intention, but it sounded like you wanted, you expect military to react in a similar manner as they did in the 90s. And then somehow from the picture I'm getting that the military is somewhat docile during this process. But if you remember 2007, 2009 even, and there are these pushbacks and maybe some of that political issues that come up, you mentioned as part of a certain agenda, whatever it is, might be responses to those kind of interventions.
From the military.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're right. I think that the military still seeks to be involved, still seeks to have veto power, but I think that its ability to do so has been transformed by changing political opportunity structures, right? And I think that here, I think the election of Abdullah Gül is a great example of it, right? It was pretty clear that secular elites really were opposed to this, and utilized the Constitutional Court. They utilized first the opposition and then the Constitutional Court to uphold his and then Erdogan stood up to them. Right, the Justice and Development Party held snap elections, and they increased their vote in Parliament, and they elected him anyway. Right, and so I think that what's happened with their success, with the Justice and Development Party's success, is they've constrained the ability of the military to intervene. In 1980, when they intervened, you had a decade of left-right political violence, right? So people were actually, despite negative reactions to the post-80 regime, people were actually welcoming stability when they intervened in September of 1980. But where's the broad-based support for any sort of intervention these days? I don't think it's there. And I think that what differentiates today from 1997 is while the Welfare Party was drawing significant support, it was in the 20s. The Justice and Development Party is up in the 40s, right? And it's dominating the political system, and it doesn't have to rule through coalition governments. And so and part of that popular appeal, I'm suggesting, is they've learned from the lessons of the Welfare Party to really relegate any kind of specific Islamic agenda to the back burner, only taking up those issues which are electorally popular, right? So I think that the difference between JDP today and welfare then is that where any kind of agenda to challenge the secular state comes into play, it's not as up in your face with the Justice and Development Party, and so that means the military can sort of cry all it want about suggesting that this is a ruse, that these guys really want to Islamicize society, which is why every time a local official wants to ban alcohol, it's terrible for Erdogan, because it undermines his whole rhetoric, which is, this is not what we want to do at all. We don't want to Islamicize the state or society at all. We want to promote democracy, right? So it's always bad when people go rogue in the lower part of the party, and they need to be brought back in line.
Well, thank you very much. I I think we sort of run out of time.
Yeah, I'm not going, so I can. We
Okay,
can talk in
okay.
formal. You know, after.
I'm going to need to run.
Well, I'm saying we can wrap up now, but after you.
Sure,
still
sure.
talk
Why don't we
about
do
it.
that, and then we can continue afterwards. But please join me in thanking Professor Brian Mello, and stay tuned to these political developments because there's never a dull moment in Turkish politics. And thank you so.